Welcome to Disunion, the Government Union Report, the podcast where we delve into the ever-evolving landscape of public sector labor policy and law. Will Sussman is an associate at the Manhattan Institute. He graduated from MIT in 2024 with a master's in electrical engineering and computer science. He was also a Jacobs Presidential Fellow in the Networks and Mobile Systems Group at MIT CSAIL. He earned his bachelor's in science from Yale in 2021. Will, interestingly, filed a lawsuit last year with the help of attorneys provided by the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. We had, in a previous episode, we had Bill Messenger on from there. Will had a fascinating piece a few weeks ago on the Manhattan Institute City Journal called Student Radicals Are Hijacking the Labor Movement, examining the growing number of college student workers like graduate assistants within the rank and file of otherwise blue-collar unions like UAW. But today I wanted to speak to Will about an article he did with Franny Block for the Free Press. It's a damning piece about the Massachusetts Teachers Association, complete with pictures. The MTA, it's a state affiliate of the massive teachers union called the National Education Association. So, Will, what is going on in Massachusetts?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. This story actually kind of landed in my lap. There was a teacher who let me know a day after a hearing in the Massachusetts State House that some of the images coming out of that hearing were bonkers. And so I took a look. I think it's a 4-hour-long hearing. And so I was watching through it. And I get to the part of the hearing where they flash a Star of David made out of dollar bills. So a clear anti-Semitic trope. And when the president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association is asked about this imagery, specifically whether it is anti-Semitic, he refuses to answer the question. This president of the union is himself Jewish, and he takes a defiant tone. He says he doesn't want to be lectured about the dangers of anti-Semitism. And then he tries to twist it around and say, like, oh, I see what you're trying to do here. You're trying to make it sound like there's something nefarious going on. When in fact there is something nefarious going on. The largest teachers union in all of New England is making available these resources with violently anti-Semitic content.
And so who called the hearing and what was the purpose of it?
Sure. So to their credit, a pair of Democrats in the Massachusetts State House chair the Commission on Anti-Semitism. And so that their names are Representative Simon Cataldo and Senator John Velis. And the two of them held this hearing. I believe it was the fourth in a series of hearings on the subject of anti-Semitism. And they just went through and prosecuted the case slide after slide after slide, showing these awful images, like I said, including some violent ones with weapons that we can talk about a little bit more later.
Yeah, well, let's get to that. So as I go through the article, I mean, one of the things that it's wonderful about the Free Press is they put their evidence right on the page. So if you as you roll through this article, which is titled, if you want to Google this, it's "Welcome to Massachusetts." I don't know how to pronounce it. Massachusetts. It's Hamas melded with Massachusetts, HAM, and then Massachusetts. But there is exhibits that are reproduced from this hearing, and they appear to be posters, right? Posters. What's the intent for these posters? Where are they supposed to go?
Great question. So the posters were linked via a resource document that was put together by the MTA, the Massachusetts Teachers Association. And the stated intent in this document is to, I forget the exact wording, but it's something to the effect of for use in classrooms to help teach about the conflict. And so even if you want to take a generous view of this document, it's remarkable that they include zero resources that tell another narrative. It's all that the Jews are the settler colonialists that have been oppressing the Palestinians, and there's lots about this, much of which veers into anti-Semitism. Like I said, there's the imagery of the Star of David made out of dollar bills. There's some posters of militants carrying assault rifles. where the clear target of this violence would be the 7 million Jews living between the river and the sea.
Yeah, well, one of the ones that I found especially shocking was is a poster, and it reads, "What was taken by force can only be returned by force," with pretty dramatic lettering. So it looks like it's almost like spray painted on a building or something like that. And those words may be confusing in some way, but the picture that's included next to the words makes it not so confusing. It's a woman, a militant wearing a keffiyeh, and she's got a machine gun in her hand, and looking straight at the viewer of the poster. So what was taken by force can only be returned by force seems to be her getting something returned to her, the land,
And you mentioned the
Palestine.
viewer of this
So
poster. The viewer is intended to be school
a child,
children,
a
children
child.
in the Massachusetts public school system.
So that's wild. There are other posters that seem like you might see them in somewhere in the Middle East, with Middle East lettering and characters, people that I'm not familiar with. But these are also apparently supposed to go up in classrooms so that students can view them. I have never seen a classroom with this kind of thing on it. Were people actually using these and placing them in schools in Massachusetts?
If any were actually used, I'm not aware. Um, but I would note that this goes back a while. So if you look at Exhibit 6 included in the article, it says Day of Rage, No to Annexation, Decolonize This Place, Solidarity Contingent, July 1st, 2020, and the address is in New York. So it's not just Massachusetts, and it's not just post October 7th. This goes back years, and I would bet that it's a nationwide problem.
Now, unions are supposedly democratic organizations, and you've been part of a union, so you may have a unique perspective on this. So as I see some of these materials, I think, well, what's going on with Massachusetts teachers? Maybe they're part of the problem, or maybe there's a problem with democracy at the MTA. What's your take on that? Do you have an idea?
I have some thoughts. I can really only speak about the few cases that I've looked into deeply, but they maybe speak to a broader issue. I think a piece of the problem is that, and we see this in national politics as well, is that um, people only come out to vote when they are motivated to.
Hmm.
And so when it's a small bargaining unit, people aren't really aware of what's going on in the leadership. They are not going to show up to vote, and if they do, they might vote a way that is against their interests, and they're just not aware of it.
Hmm.
Uh, so what ends up happening is the people who assume the leadership roles in these unions are the most ideologically committed, and that tends to be these sort of far left, radical students, teachers. Generally speaking, it's the white collar professionals that have these radical ideologies.
Hmm.
And we see, you mentioned the City Journal piece. You see that this is in tension with the actual interests of many blue collar union workers. That the white collar workers love to claim that they're part of this movement in solidarity. That's their
Hmm.
favorite word. Um, but in fact, as we reported in the City Journal piece, um, one of the white collar workers told the janitors that they held hostage at Columbia that this moment is bigger than you.
Hmm.
And so the ideology takes precedence over the actual interests of the workers that the unions are supposed to represent.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, that would make sense. I've also, as I've looked around some of the materials that are produced by the NEA and AFT, biggest teachers unions in the country, most of what I find are materials sort of like a Wild West. The teachers union might provide the sort of the hub for all this material, but they really don't control what gets put on it at all. So that, but there are national organizations that seem to produce this kind of stuff, and they always find their way to these teaching hubs in a way that differing perspectives really don't. I can't tell you why. I'm not sure if it's the teachers union intentionally pushing it or something like that, but I that's all to say they don't put up most of this stuff for a vote. I doubt that Massachusetts Teachers Union at their national meeting or whatever asked the teachers whether or not they wanted this stuff to show up in their classrooms. They made it available, and some teachers happened to take advantage of it.
It's even more nuanced than that because sometimes they will put it up for a vote, but there's no quorum requirements oftentimes, and so it'll be a large majority of those who actually show up to vote. But most teachers, they just want to teach. They just want to help their students. I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority of teachers are not ideologically committed to this far left radicalism. But they put it up for a vote almost for show, so that they can say, like Vladimir Putin, we got 90% of the votes. When in reality, it's 90% of the 100 people that voted, and the thousands more that didn't vote likely would have voted the other way.
Yeah. I had a small job in journalism early in my career, and one of those sham votes happened with, I believe it was Hussein. Saddam Hussein who was in power at that time. And for some reason, journalistic standards they reported the vote count, but they didn't feel like it would have been objective to say, but these things are a sham, right? So a lot of times we don't get very good reporting on this. It takes, the free press, it takes City Journal to do this kind of digging and to report some of this. I'd be interested to hear how democratic this really is. Well, you mentioned Max Page. He's the president of the MTA, and he happens to be Jewish. Same kind of thing is happening with American Federation of Teachers. The president of the AFT is Randy Weingarten, who's also Jewish, and yet these materials are out there. What did he have to say about the fact that he's Jewish, and yet some of these materials seem to be a threat to his very existence?
He didn't say very much of anything. What he did say, and we include this in the Free Press piece, he says, quote, "I understand the historical virulence of anti-Semitism. I understand the newly resurgent strains of anti-Semitism, and I'm too old and too confident in my experience and views to be lectured about the dangers of anti-Semitism." So my interpretation of this quote, I should have said end quote, my interpretation of his words is that he believes, and there's a kernel of truth to this, that anti-Semitism is on the right, just like it was in Nazi Germany. But I think what he fails to understand is that, and you may be familiar with horseshoe theory, the far right and the far left bend into each other, and neither side of the political spectrum has a monopoly on anti-Semitism. And I think he is blind to the anti-Semitism on the far left.
Interesting. And I think at one point in the piece, he tried to make the case that this is simply a reflection that there's a diversity of viewpoints within the union. And I assume that means he's got, pro-Israel content as well. Is there any evidence of that?
No. As far as I can tell, there was no pro-Israel content, at least in this document. And the thing that he tries to do in the hearing, which I found rather gross, because he can't bring himself to condemn the obviously anti-Semitic materials, the best play that he seems to have gone with was to cast it as an example of what not to do. In the same way that in a history class you might show a Nazi poster and say, "Look, this is bad. We shouldn't be doing this." And so he's trying to say, "Well, look at these awful resources. Our teachers are smart enough to be able to present it as a counterexample, as something that you wouldn't want to do." But that's incredibly dishonest. It's clear that the intent of these posters was to be used as an example of what to do, to cast the 7 million Jews between the river and the sea as settler colonialists and oppressors of Palestinians. And so he is basically just making excuses.
Well, I was a teacher for just a short time in the high school, on the high school level. And even though I might have been smart enough to see this, I'm not sure I would have felt responsible showing it to the children It's really the idea is, are they smart enough to be able to see through this? If you, one of the exhibits here is Joe Biden, and above his head are in old big green letters are serial killer. And it says more than 20,000 Palestinian deaths since October 7th.
A Hamas
Obviously,
statistic, by the way.
what's that now?
That's a Hamas statistic, by the way.
Right, I wasn't going to mention that, but yes, the what you're showing a student here is something pretty irresponsible, I think. There's some F words, I think, in the smaller text down here, and or at least on one of the posters. And these are not things I'd be happy with a teacher showing my children, even in high school. A description of it. The idea that there's a left and a right, and that Joe Biden is maybe even here to the right of these leftists is very interesting. I'd want my kid to know that, but I don't think I need him labeled a serial killer here, whether you like him or not.
Mm.
Well, tell me more about, I don't know if we could zoom out a little bit here. It seems like something strange is happening on the left when it comes to Hamas and Israel. And I've read a lot about it. Everybody's got different theories about it. How did the left get into bed with these folks? And what are we to do about it?
Sure. So I have some thoughts. It may be a bigger question than I can answer, but I do suspect that there is a financial component to it. One of my biggest issues with my own union experience is that they wanted to take $700 per student per year, and if you failed to pay them this money, which they then use to finance their protests against Israel.
The union, you mean, Will?
The union, exactly. If you failed to pay the union hundreds of dollars a year, then they were going to kick you out. In my case, it was to kick me out of grad school. But fortunately, in the public sector, there's a Supreme Court ruling called Janus, which gives public sector employees the right to withhold dues payments and not be fired for that. But yes, there seems to be a financial component. I would be willing to bet that Qatar is having some sort of influence here. And more generally about the left, I think it's almost bad science. As a scientist myself, I think of it in this way: that we come up with a model of the world, and when we encounter new evidence, we compare it to our model. And when it shows that the model is wrong, then we update our model because the model must have been wrong. And there seems to be a lack of intellectual humility, if you will, that there's this settler colonial idea from various other parts of the world, like French Algeria, for example. And people on the left try to apply the same ideology to the Middle East. And something like October 7th, I think, shows just how wrong this ideology is. But many people can't bring themselves to update the model. They are so committed to their particular worldview that the facts have to be twisted to the point where it's unrecognizable from reality.
So as with this issue here in Massachusetts, a unionist might say something like, well, look, this is our perspective. We're bringing it. If you don't like that, then, you can vote out your union, or start your own union with a more conservative viewpoint or pro-Israel viewpoint in this particular situation, and compete on the free market for it. So what's the problem? How would you answer that?
I would love that if that was true. Unfortunately, it's not true. There's this thing called exclusive representation that even Janus, the Supreme Court ruling I mentioned that allows you to withhold dues from a union that you disagree with, even that ruling does not end the practice of exclusive representation, which means even after you've withdrawn your dues money, you are still represented by that union, and you are not allowed to create a competing union and have sort of a marketplace. And so there's some deep structural issues. There was an opportunity for the Supreme Court to potentially weigh in on this practice of exclusive representation. I wrote about that in a piece in the Daily Wire that I can send to you afterward.
Yeah, I'd like
In
to
the
see
show
it.
notes.
We talk a lot about exclusive representation on this program, and one of the lawsuits that I followed up there actually had to do with some Jewish professors in the CUNY system in New York that
Exactly.
I thought that would have been a fantastic vehicle for this.
Me too. And
So I
the
wrote
piece
about
that I
it
mentioned in the
when it
Daily
was in
Wire,
the.
that was co-authored with Avraham Goldstein, the main plaintiff in that
Oh,
case.
great. Okay, great. I wrote about that on when it was at the district court level. I felt so strongly about that being a potential vehicle,
Mm.
and had some really good people on that case.
So it's
Um,
unfortunate that the Supreme Court didn't take it ultimately. Basically, we need to wait for another case like it to come along. And I do wonder if maybe the Massachusetts Teachers Association presents an opportunity for such a case, just because, like we said, it's a public sector union. Employees
mhm.
already have the opportunity to withhold their money, but they can't withhold their representation. And so perhaps there's a case that could be filed on this issue.
Now the unionist is still yelling at the podcast right now because they're going to say there are ways to get rid of the union. Now it takes a democratic effort, but you'd have to go back to the labor board and ask them to decertify the union, perhaps replace it with a rival union or something like that. Then they would have exclusive representation. Was that something that you guys looked into at any point in your history as a union represented employee?
So, in my experience, in addition to all of the election issues that we discussed, like the quorum thing and the turnout issue, there's an additional problem when it comes to student unions, like the union at Columbia from the City Journal piece, which
Mhm.
is the students are only there for a handful of years. The purpose of going to school is to get in, get your degree, and get out. And so by the time the political capital is built up to oust the union, the people who built that capital have graduated, and you're
Mhm.
starting from scratch every single year. Um, so it's extraordinarily difficult. While yes, on paper there is a means to do it, practically speaking, once a union is in place, it's there forever.
You're right. That's especially true for graduate students. Totally, totally right. One of the things that used to be acknowledged about creating a bargaining unit at the NLRB or a state labor board is that if workers are so transient like that, then they're really not appropriate for unionization anyway. For instance, the graduate students who voted the union in as the exclusive representative may not be around long enough to actually have a collective bargaining agreement negotiated and finalized so that the people who actually, get the CBA and whatever benefit there might be, if any, had nothing to do with bringing the union in.
Right.
It ends
And
up
this
being
is,
that
by
the
the way,
union stays around for a long time and the employer stays around for a long time, but the students are just sort of chits at the bargaining table.
right. This has flip-flopped several times over the last, I think, 50 years since the passage of the National Labor Relations Act. It was ruled early on that for this exact reason, graduate students should not be considered statutory employees under the act. And I think around the year 2000, it might have been the Columbia decision. That was the first time that the government entertained the possible legality of graduate students being considered employees.
Mm.
And a few years later, so that was at the end of the Clinton administration. Then during the Bush administration, the NLRB overturned that decision. Then during the Obama administration, they overturned it again. And then many unions were planning on forming at the end of the Obama administration, but then Trump got elected. And they knew that it was going to be, once again, an unfriendly administration toward unionizing. And so they basically laid in wait. This was my experience as well. The union that I ended up being included in formed during this period,
Mm.
2018 or so. And only once Biden, the self-described most pro-union president in American history, only once he was elected did all of these unions that were lying in wait decide to have their elections. And like we said, once graduate student unions are formed, they are basically there in perpetuity. So we're stuck with them until Either Congress passes some legislation or the Supreme Court rules some of these facets unconstitutional.
So what's the remedy here with anti-Semitism in unions? I mean, they get in through this sort of lopsided process that allows them exclusive representation. That means they kind of have a monopoly over what the employees hear at their workplace, how they're represented. How do we fix this? How do we take the anti-Semitism out?
Sure. So I think it's all about incentives. If the union leaders were incentivized to listen to their Jewish employers, the Jewish students, Jewish employees, Jewish students, then they might actually think twice about saying horribly anti-Semitic things, doing anti-Semitic hate crimes, things like that. And so in my case, and the solution that we ended up getting out of my case was I got to divert my Jews' money to a charity of my choosing. So instead of giving $700 a year to my union, I could give it to Magen David Adom, which is the Red Cross in Israel, for example. Or I could give it to, and this is the one that I ultimately chose, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. I have a family member with Crohn's, and so that's a cause that's near and dear to my heart. And so I feel a lot better giving my money to this charity than I do giving it to an anti-Semitic union. And if enough people that have moral, religious objections to their union decide to pull their money and give it to someone else, if the union starts to look at their finances and say, hey, we're losing a lot of money, maybe we should stop doing all this crazy protest stuff, then people would be incentivized to bring their money back to the union and actually work toward things that benefit everyone, like a fatter paycheck and better benefits.
Yeah. So that's definitely one way of addressing this. But it would take collective action of some kind, right? What was your, has there been any response to this hearing in Massachusetts among teachers? Do you know?
The union blinked. They told the press, I think the Boston Globe, that they would take down these materials. But again, unfortunately, they seem to have lied because they took down one or two links. I think, for example, the Star of David made out of dollar bills, I think that one is gone. But many of the other posters remain up. And in fact, they have a conference coming up later this summer where they've invited people like Cornel West and many other even more ideologically far left people to come and speak to these teachers. It's a summit of teachers, and my worry is that many teachers who are good teachers, they just want to do their job, they want to help their kids. They might get roped into this conference thinking that it's a professional development opportunity. And what they'll get instead is this far left training run by a member of the Massachusetts chapter of the American Communist Party.
Well, by the time they get there, they'll figure it out. I've watched some of these conferences online, and they look like political rallies. They don't seem like they're helping teachers teach. They're helping teachers do politics, and to the extent that teachers want to get engaged in leftist politics, the union is an obvious hierarchy that can get them in the game, so to speak. But I'm not sure what it has to do with teaching.
Right. And I think there's a really important point here, which is that the public schools belong to the public. It is administered by the state. And so, again, major kudos to the two Democrats in the deep blue state of Massachusetts, or as I call it, Hamassachusetts. Credit to those Democrats for going against their party in some ways and taking a stand against this virulently anti-Semitic material. Because they're the ones who are responsible for making sure that this material is not being distributed in classrooms. Unfortunately, in other similar states, I'm calling from Long Island, New York, and the New York State House, which is similarly controlled by Democrats, has done absolutely nothing about anti-Semitism in the K-12 school system. And I'll give you one example. Right here in my district on Long Island, middle schoolers were giving Jewish students the Hitler salute during a Holocaust lesson.
Hmm.
And the state did nothing about it, even though the responsibility falls to the state to deal with these issues.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a strange kind of. It used to be that Hitler was the one guy that we could all call the bad guy, and it's strange how the world's been flipped upside down like that.
Mm.
Well, I will make a legal point to add to yours. If public education is, belongs to the public, in some ways, so should unions. So the reason I say that is that unions have their power, and you mentioned exclusive representation. That's just one example. There are many others. They get their power from state law. The state legislature, and talk about New York, passes state laws that allow for exclusive representation. They've also allowed in New York for a very special arrangement where the union gets to keep exclusive representation, but refuse to represent non-members in grievance proceedings or arbitration. It's kind of a strange thing that was untested in the law before these slew of states passed this kind of law right before Janus to sort of blunt its effect. But there are other things like paycheck deductions. It goes straight from a worker's paycheck. They don't even see it to the union. These are all state laws that give these kinds of power to unions. And just like a government contract or something like that, it would seem that something is owed from the government contractor, or in this case, the union. Some kind of acknowledgement that they've been given a state-blessed monopoly, and that they should use it very carefully. This
It's a
is like
vicious
some of
circle.
the most,
The
yeah.
politicians who pass these laws that give the unions this power are then rewarded with the union's endorsement and funds. Many millions of dollars go to generally Democrats in order to cement their hold on power, so that they'll continue to pass these favorable laws for the union. It's a vicious cycle.
Well said. Well, Will, I'm glad that you're doing this kind of work. Um, you're welcome in this field. I'm thrilled, and you're brilliant. I also you may have been, you called yourself a scientist. The MS and the BS that you received. I don't know that we've ever had a scientist on this show, so it's a great thing to have you. Where can we follow your work? How can we stay up to date with what you're doing?
Sure. So I'm pretty active on Twitter or X. My username is real Will Sussman. Um, uh, yeah, that's probably the main channel. I've also got Instagram and Facebook and other similar social channels where I often share my stories.
Okay, well, I'll find you there. But thanks for coming on the program, and hope to have you back soon.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.